In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today, I will talking about liberalism and how it affects Malaysian society. In Malaysia, religious tolerance is an important part of liberalism, but it is often challenged by social issues and legal limits. Even though the countries promote harmony among different religions, problems like unfair treatment, strict speech law, and misunderstanding between faith show that the liberal ideas of freedom and equality are not fully practiced in daily life. This study looked at the tension between liberalism and Islamic ethical value, focusing on how ideas like individual freedom and equality fit with or conflict with the moral principle and cultural tradition in Islam. This assignment also gives a short explanation of liberalism as a political ideology. It describes how liberalism began as a reaction to religious control and fixed social status in medieval Europe. It explained the main principle of liberalism, such as equal moral rights, individual freedoms, limited government power, and private property, as well as its influence on today's economic and cultural system. The study ends by discussing the strengths and weaknesses of liberalism from an Islamic ethical point of view.
Liberalism is a political idea that grew as a reaction to the strict rules of medieval Europe. At that time, people were expected to follow one religion and accept their social position based only on birth. Liberalism challenged the system by promoting freedom and choice. So the word itself comes from the Latin word liber, which means free. As its core, liberalism supports the belief that people should be free to their life and make their own choices with little interference from the government. So although the word liberal was first used in Spain in the early 80s, the idea behind it had already started much earlier, especially in the 16th and 70s. So the main founder of liberalism was John Locke, a British philosopher whose writings gave the clearest foundation for this ideology. So other thinkers like Maastricht and Voltaire also contribute in events such as the Glorious Revolution of 1688 in Britain, helped limit the king's power and promote individual rights. So then, one of the most important parts of liberalism in tolerance, the idea that people should be free to hold different beliefs. In the 16th, Europe was full of religious conflict and governments often punished people for their faith. Locke responded to this by writing a letter on toleration. In it, he argued that true beliefs come from within and cannot be forced by law. If someone is punished for their religion, they may pretend to agree, but they will not truly believe. Locke insisted that belief must be free and personal. So Locke's ideas were powerful because they show why tolerance is necessary in a free society. His work laid the foundation for modern liberalism and the values of freedom and human rights that we recognize today. In short, liberalism grew because people wanted more freedom, less religious conflict, and fairer society. And John Locke, as its founder, gave the strongest arguments to support it.
Today I will explain the main characteristic and principle of liberalism. Liberalism is a value system that focuses on individual freedom, equality, and basic human rights. It teaches that everyone has rights that must be protected by the law. This ideology is built on four key principles. The first principle is equal moral worth. This means that every person has the same value and no one is naturally better or more important than others. Everyone should be treated fairly and equally under the law. For example, in a democracy, both a poor farmer and rich businessman have the same voting power. They each have only one vote. And the second principle is individual liberties and rights. This refers to the freedom for people to think, speak, and live the way they choose, as long as they do not harm others. People can express their opinions, follow any religions, and make their own choices freely. These rights are protected by the law. In a liberal society, citizens can even criticize the government peacefully without being punished. The third principle is limited government. This means the government's power is controlled by the law. The government should protect citizens' rights, not interfere every part of their lives. There must be also checks and balance, so no single parts of the government becomes too powerful. For example, the government must follow the federal constitution and cannot violate basic rights. And the final principle is the right to private property. Liberalism believes that people should be allowed to own and control their own property, such as land or businesses. Owning property gives people freedom, independence, and responsibility. The government cannot take someone's property without a fair reason and fair repayment. For example, if someone owns land, they can sell it, rent it, or keep it as they wish.
We move to our next part, which is impact of liberalism on society. Liberalism has influenced all levels of society by promoting ideas of personal freedom, equality, and open-mindedness, which not only shapes people thinking but also transform economic system and social values. While each encourage modernization and tolerance, some Muslims view liberal ideas as a challenge to traditional belief and moral boundaries. And next, from the economic perspective, liberalism reduces government control over the economy and give more power to the private sectors. This includes policies like privatization of public services such as transport, education, and energy. Although privatization can increase efficiency and promote competition, it often raises costs for the public. For example, higher transportation fares. As a result, economic growth may occur, but wealth distribution become uneven, widening gap between the rich and the poor people. And next, effect on faith and spirituality. Liberal thinking encourage the separation of religion from daily life and public policy, which conflicts with Islamic teaching that integrate religion into all aspects of life. For example, rejecting religious-based law or restricting religious dress in school and workplace. But it can distance Muslims from their faith. Over time, this may weaken the importance of religion and shift moral values toward individual freedom over religious principles. In contrast, Islam emphasizes akidah, syariah, and moral character as the core of a Muslim.
As for my part, I will talk about strengths and weaknesses. First, the strength. The strength of justice and equality. Liberalism insists that every single person has inherent worth and must be treated equally under the law, regardless of their background. This is a profound agreement with Islam, which holds adil, which is justice, as a divine command. The Quran mandates fairness and judgment, and the Prophet Muhammad SAW taught that an Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab. Liberalism focuses on legal equality that really supports Islam's foundational requirement for fairness and human dignity. Next, the protection of individual rights and freedoms. Liberalism champions personal liberties like freedom of belief and speech. This resonates with the Islamic principle that there shall be no compulsion in religion. Islam respects free will in matters of faith, encouraging sincere conviction. So, liberal freedoms are compatible as long as they operate within the ethical and moral boundaries set to prevent harm and injustice. As for now, the weaknesses. Starting with excessive individualism. While freedom is good, prioritizing personal desires over communal responsibilities leads to selfishness and social breakdown. Islam, however, places massive emphasis on the ummah and mutual support. The Prophet ﷺ said, "None of you truly believe what he loves for his brother, what he loves for himself." Liberal autonomy must be balanced with moral and communal responsibility to avoid social isolation and maintain social health. The next point is secularism and the rejection of divine guidance. Liberalism often sidelines religion, treating it as a purely private matter. From an Islamic perspective, this is a major weakness because Islam views divine guidance Sharia as essential for justice and moral order in public life. The Quran warns that ignoring revelation risks creating laws and contradict ethical and spiritual, making human-made laws incomplete without God's moral framework. As for the third point, economic inequality and materialism. Unchecked liberal capitalism frequently leads to wealth concentration, causing social injustice. Islam condemns this imbalance, warning that wealth must not be merely circulated among the rich and among you. In Quran, this is why zakat is a pillar of the faith. It ensures that wealth is distributed fairly, insisting that economic freedom must be tempered by social responsibility and compassion. As for the last point of the weaknesses is moral relativism. Liberalism tendency to allow individuals to define their own moral values conflict sharply with Islam belief in an objective, which is divine morality. The Quran warns against the one who takes his own desire as his God without universal divine standards. Society risks moral confusion and detachment from spiritual truth. Islam teaches that true freedom comes from submission to God's command and not by following personal desire.
In conclusion, liberalism teaches the importance of freedom, equality and protecting everyone's basic rights, so society can be fair and peaceful. It promotes tolerance, free expression and limits on government power to make sure no one is oppressed or silenced. This idea matches many Islamic values, especially Islam teaching on justice, fairness and the dignity of every human being. However, liberalism can also clash with Islamic teaching in some areas, such as when individual freedom is placed above community responsibility or when religion is removed from public life. These differences show that liberalism has good ideas, but it cannot be followed completely without thinking carefully about Islamic principles. When we understand both the benefit and the limit of liberalism, we can better handle modern social and political issues in Malaysia and other places. This helps us appreciate freedom, equality and open-mindedness while still holding onto the spiritual, moral and community values that Islam teach. Finding this balance is important for building a society that is modern and inclusive, yet still moral strong and spiritual meaningful. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Liberalism is a worldview. It's predicated upon concepts like freedom, equality, liberty. Liberalism, the term liberal, it had a meaning in the pre-modern world, before modernity. Because the word liberal comes from freeing yourself. And before modernity, the concept that the Christian world had adopted in terms of liberty or liberalism or liberal was to free yourself from your base desires, right? So your desire to eat, to sleep, to procreate, free yourself of that. That was to be truly liberal, right? Liberty, that's what it signified. But once you had the advent of the modern world, right? After the age of enlightenment and so on, now liberalism doesn't mean free yourself from your base desires. It means free yourself in the sense that you can do whatever you want, right? So you're free from that perspective, all right? In other words, it means the exact opposite. Instead of freeing yourself from your base desires, is to submit yourself to all of your desires. It literally switched its meaning, okay?
So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So, today let us discuss about SIS. SIS is Sister in Islam, which is an NGO that focuses on women's rights, justice and Islamic family law. They talk about issues like domestic violence, polygamy, child marriage and women's rights in divorce. So, what is the issue between SIS and Islamic authorities?
So the main issue is the fatwa issued in Selangor, which labels SIS as liberal and pluralist views that are considered deviant. This is the biggest controversy.
Exactly. The authorities say SIS interpret Islamic texts too freely using modern human rights perspective instead of traditional scholarly methods.
Now let's discuss why the SIS is called as liberal.
Sis question practice like polygamy, saying it's unfair in modern time. They also strongly argue with domestic violence and say Islam protect women's safety. They also oppose child marriage, saying Islam prioritizes protection of minors. These opinions are seen as liberals by some scholars, but SIS argues they are still within Islamic principle of justice and compassion.
SIS didn't accept the fatwa quietly. They brought the issue to the court, challenging whether religious authority can declare an NGO as deviant without giving them chance to defend themselves. They argue that interpretation of Islam should allow discussion, not just one fixed viewpoint. So, this court case became a big national debate. Who has authority to interpret Islam, and can civil courts review religious decision?
So on all the points that you guys have said, can I know what is the impact of those issues?
So it highlights the tension between traditional interpretation and modern view on women's rights. And it's also raised the question of whether NGO can speak on Islamic matter or if only religious authorities can do so. And I think for the public, it creates more awareness about topics like justice, equality, and how Islamic law is applied today.
So guys, to conclude our talks just now, the SIS issue in Islam is not simply about an NGO. It's about interpretation authority and law Islamic teachings guide society today. So guys, thank you for all of your opinions. May we meet again, inshallah.
Allah.